Hey, 6th grade, Mr. Herzberg here, and if you're watching this video, it is Wednesday, April 15th, which means Wednesdays, time for some Tom Sawyer and a journal. Today we're going to be covering Chapter 6 of Tom Sawyer, and in today's journal we are going to be doing the same standard we were doing yesterday, which is citing text evidence, reading informational text 6.1. So let's get started first with taking a look at today's journal. You're going to be reading 4 paragraphs about the lost city of Atlantis. Now, as you know, there's been many movies and stories written about Atlantis. It's, long story short, it's an entire island that was sunk by, they believe, the gods because the people of the island did not properly give respect to the gods, so they sunk it. Long story, a lot more details than that. But you're going to read a little bit about it, and then you're going to answer 3 questions citing text evidence. The first one wants to know, why do scholars, and scholars are like the really smart people that study it. You know, they go to school, they write papers on it. Why do the scholars believe that Atlantis was a fictional place created by the scholar Plato? So there's a question for you. Go back to the text and see if you can figure out how they think it was actually created by Plato as a kind of a fictitious or make-believe place. Your second question, remember, citing text evidence. I should be getting 2 to 3 sentences here, guys, not just one quick sentence. I need 2 to 3 sentences here explaining your answer and then citing your text evidence. Remember, paraphrase, not word for word. Paraphrase in your own words. If people understood that Atlantis was a fictional creation for thousands of years, what made people start to think it had really once existed? So go back to the text, try and figure out what it says about why Atlantis kind of went from being a place created by Plato and his imagination to something that might have been real. What is it that's changed over time? And in your third question on today's journal, what is the role of Ignatius Donnelly in popularizing the idea of a lost Atlantis? What does he mean by lost Atlantis? What made it lost according to him? So tell me all about Ignatius Donnelly, who he is, what's he doing. Yeah, go back to the text. 2 or 3 sentences is all it takes, guys. And then number 4, what was the role of Charles Berlitz in popularizing the idea of lost Atlantis? So how did Charles Berlitz help with understanding the lost Atlantis idea? So 4 questions, 2 to 3 sentences per question. Go back, read first, answer the questions, go back, pick out your text evidence, paraphrase. Don't copy word for word, guys. Remember, paraphrase. That means put someone else's words into your own words, okay? All right, let's go on to Tom Sawyer. We last left off in Tom Sawyer chapter 5. Tom was at church. He was bored out of his mind. He was sitting in the pew playing with a pinch bug that came by. He saw a stray dog that went by the window. The stray dog walked up the aisle. The pinch bug bit the dog yelped and ran out of the church. You're probably thinking, Mr. Herzberg, why is the church door open? Why is a random dog just wandering in and out? Well, this was written in the 1800s where air conditioning didn't exist. And in Mark Twain's town of Missouri, state of Missouri, in St. Petersburg, there was no air conditioning. So a lot of these churches were super, super hot. And so a lot of times what they would do when they shove all these people in there is they leave windows open, they leave doors open to kind of get a draft going. So the dog probably came in because the door to the church was open to let in some fresh air. So you learn pretty quick, Tom does not like church, he's very bored by it, and he is finding any and everything he can to distract himself, whether it be a little bug on the ground or laughing at a dog getting bit by the bug. Okay? Chapter 6, it's Monday. And as you know, like most kids, Monday means going back to school. Well, this particular day, Tom does not want to go to school. In chapter 6, you're going to see Tom do any and everything he can to try and get his Aunt Polly to think that there's something wrong with him. The first thing he goes for is a sore toe. So he lays there in bed for a minute, and he's trying to come up in his mind with what he could do to pretend is wrong with him to get out of going to school. So he thinks, okay, wait, first I'll try my sore toe. So he starts moaning and making sounds, and then of course his cousin Sid, who sleeps next to him, gets up and thinks there's something really seriously wrong with Tom, and kind of goes through it, and he even fools Sid. Sid runs downstairs to Aunt Polly. She comes up, she asks what's wrong. He tries to tell her it's his toe. She looks at it. She's like, it doesn't look bad. Then he says, oh no, it's my tooth. He says, I've got a terrible, terrible toothache. And then she goes, I got a cure for that. She ties a piece of rope to his tooth. She then gets a piece of hot coal, and actually it's really, really horrible thing she does. She's gonna burn him with it. He yanks back, and the tooth comes right out. So she takes care of that. She said, well, we took care of your sore toe. It's nothing. Now we've got to take care of this tooth. Now go to school. So she sends him off to school. He's very unhappy. On his way to school, he runs into his BFF, Huck Finn. Now, so you're going to learn about Huck Finn, guys. This is kind of the first time you've seen him. All the parents in town do not want their kids hanging around this Huck Finn character. He represents and symbolizes everything wrong with society in their minds. His father is the town drunk. So Huck gets to come and go as he pleases. He has no parents telling him what to do. His father is allowed to loaf around and sleep off hangovers, while Huck kind of does what he wants. He never wears shoes. He barely ever has a shirt on. He usually has a pair of overalls, and that's it. An old straw hat, and just wanders the town. Well, Tom runs into him on the way to school, and they have an argument about stump water, and Huck tries to tell Tom about all these bizarre beliefs he has about saying these rituals and bad luck and all this stuff that doesn't make any sense to Tom. But anyways, Tom gets late to school as a result of this. And his teacher, Mr. Dobbins, gets the ruler out and beats Tom. Yes, that's right. Teachers were allowed to beat kids in the 1800s. And Mr. Dobbins does just that. He comes into school and he gets even more trouble when Mr. Dobbins says, where were you, Tom? He says, I was with Huck Finn. And that really sets him off. Because again, I told you, the parents, the adults of this town do not like Huck Finn. So he spanks Tom in front of the whole class with the ruler and then tells Tom to go sit with the girls. Tom, being Tom, he had no problem with this because he goes and sits right next to his new crush, Becky Thatcher, the town judge's daughter. So he starts writing little love notes to her, and he is loving it. So let's go ahead and read a little bit into this, and then I'll let you guys do some reading for homework, okay? All right, here we go. Chapter 6. Monday morning found Tom miserable. Monday mornings always found him this way, because it began just another miserable week's slow suffering in school. He generally began that day wishing that he had no intervening holidays. It made the going into captivity and fetters again so much more odious. So Tom laid there thinking. Presently it occurred to him that he wished he was sick, and that he could stay home from school. Here was a vague possibility, he thought. So he canvassed his system. No ailments were found, and so he investigated them again. This time he thought he could maybe detect colicky symptoms, and he began to encourage them with considerable hope. But soon they grew feeble and presently died wholly away. He reflected further. Suddenly he discovered something. One of his upper front teeth was loose. This was lucky. He was about to begin to groan as a starter as he called when it occurred to him that if he came in to court with that argument, well, his aunt would have it pulled out, and that would hurt. So he thought he would hold the tooth for maybe a backup and seek further. Nothing offered some little time, and so he remembered hearing the doctor tell him about a certain thing that laid up in a patient for 2 or 3 weeks and threatened him to lose a finger. So the boy eagerly drew on a sore toe from under his sheet and held it up for inspection. But now, how did he know the necessary symptoms? However, it seemed well worthwhile chance, so he fell to groaning with considerable spirit, as his cousin Sid slept unconscious. Tom tried to groan louder and louder. He fancied he began to feel pain, and Sid wouldn't even wake up. He was snoring. So Tom was panting with exertions by this time. He took the rest and swelled himself up, fetched a succession of admirable groans. Sid was still snoring. Tom was aggravated at this point. So finally he said, "Sid, Sid," and shook him awake. This course worked well, and Tom began to groan again. Sid yawned, stretched, then brought himself up his elbow with a snort and began to stare at Tom. Tom went on groaning. Sid said, "Tom, what is it, Tom?" "Come on now, Tom, here now, what is it? What's the matter with you?" He shook Tom and looked him in his face anxiously. Tom just let out a moan. "Oh, don't, Sid, don't joggle me, I'm in such pain." "What's the matter, Tom? You mean to call Auntie?" "No, never mind her. It'll all be over by and by soon. Don't call anybody. But I must now, Tom. Don't go groaning. It's awful. How long you been like this? Hours. Don't touch me, Sid. You'll kill me. Tom, why don't you wake me sooner? Oh, God. It makes my flesh crawl to hear you like this. What's the matter? I forgive everything you ever did, so he said. Everything you ever done to me. When I'm... He lets out another groan. Tom, you ain't dying, are you? Don't you die now, Tom. I forgive everything, Sid. Tell him, Sid. And Sid, you give my window sash and my cat with one eye to that new girl that's in town. And tell her... But Sid had already snatched up his clothes and left the room. Tom was suffering in reality now. So handsomely was imagination, it was actually working. And so his groans had gathered quite a genuine tone. So Sid flew downstairs and said, Aunt Polly, come quick, Tom's dying. Dying? Yes, don't wait, come quick. Rubbish, I don't believe it. But she fled upstairs nonetheless, with Sid Mary at her heels, and her face grew white, her lips trembled. When she reached the bedside, she gasped. Tom, what's the matter with you? Oh, Auntie, I'm dying. What's the matter with you? What is the matter with you, child? Oh, Auntie, it's my toe. It's mortified. The old lady sank down in her chair and laughed, and then cried, and then did a little both. This restored her, and she said, Tom, what turn did you give me? Now you shut up with that nonsense and climb out of this bed. The groan ceased and the pain vanished. The boy felt a little foolish. Well, Aunt Polly, it seemed like it was mortified, and it hurt really bad. I never minded my tooth at all. Your tooth? What about your tooth? She said. Well, one's loose, and it aches awful. Don't you begin groaning again. Let's take a look at your mouth here, Tom. Well, your tooth is loose, but it's not gonna. You're not going to die. Mary, go get me some silk, some thread, and a chunk of fire out of the kitchen. All right, guys, I'm going to stop there. I don't want you to read anymore, so I want you to finish up this chapter. I've got 3 pages left. I want you to see how Aunt Polly deals with the loose tooth. I want you to see how, again, pay attention to Huck and how this character, you're going to meet him. And again, he gets a sequel. The sequel to this is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. You're going to see an entire book that Mark Twain wrote just for Huck. But Huck is the symbol of poverty and cruel ignorance in this time, where they allowed a child, before social services or anything could come in and help, a child would just wander the streets while his drunk father sat in a shack and was allowed to get away with whatever he wanted. So kind of get to know why the town doesn't want other kids associating with Huck, and how Huck's allowed to not go to school or do anything. And I also want you to pay attention to how Tom takes every situation he can and makes the best of it, whether it be the painting and paying kids to do the painting, or trading his tickets for Bibles, or in this case, being forced to sit with the girls later with Mr. Dobbins, and he finds the perfect seat right next to his new girlfriend. So do that, answer the questions we've got for you, and make sure you turn them in. Remember, turn in the journal and turn in the questions. I'll see you guys on Thursday. Please show up to my Google Meets. 6th grade is from 1 to 1:30. Talk to you guys later.